Hello, I'm Hannah Donnett with the Collaborative on Health and the Environment. J&J is bringing you the latest environmental health science through our partnerships, calls, webinars, science serves, publications, and social media. I would like to welcome everyone to today's Young EDC Scientist Showcase webinar, or YES webinar, which is titled Phthalates and Plasticizers in Fast Food. Our moderator today is Sarah Howard, founder and manager of diabetesenvironment.org. We will leave time following the presentation for a brief Q&A session. You may type in questions to the Q&A feature available on the menu bar at the top of your window at any point during the presentation. After the presentation, our moderator will read out questions for our speakers to respond to. We will get to as many comments and questions as we can during the Q&A period, and we'll follow up as we are able. For those who have called in on the phone, we have posted today's slides to accompany today's webinar on our website. You can download these by going to healthandenvironment.org. Please scroll to the bottom of the page and select today's webinar. On the webinar page is a link to the slides. Everyone on our webinars right now is muted with the exception of our moderator and our speaker. The webinar is scheduled to last for 30 minutes and is being recorded for our call and webinar archive. With that, I'll turn things over to you, Sarah.
Thank you, Hannah. Hello, everyone. Welcome. So as Hannah said, this webinar is part of a series called the Young EDC Scientist Showcase, or YES. It's sponsored by HEEDS, which stands for Healthy Environment and Endocrine Disruptor Strategies, who together with the Collaborative on Health and Environment is hosting this series. So the HEEDS Mentoring Working Group initiated this series as an opportunity for early career scientists to present their research. This is our 7th webinar in the series, and they're all online at CHE's website, and you can watch the recordings. If you want to sign up for announcements of future webinars, you can go to heeds.org and sign up for the HEEDS newsletter, and we'll announce them there. So today our topic is phthalates and plasticizers in fast food. We're having one speaker today, followed by a Q&A period. Our speaker is Dr. Loriah Edwards, who is a postdoc working at both the George Washington School of Public Health and the Environmental Defense Fund. She earned her PhD in environmental health from the Boston University School of Public Health in 2019. And last year, she was a fellow in the Agents of Change in Environmental Justice program. And I'll just note that that program is accepting applications now until April 15th, and she'll mention that in her talk as well. She's mainly going to talk about her study published last fall that measured levels of phthalates and phthalate replacement chemicals in food and gloves from fast food restaurants. And so, Loriah, you may go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And I'm very pleased to be talking about my research I've conducted at GW. So this, as Sarah mentioned, this work was published in the Journal of Environmental Epidemiology and Exposure Science last fall, and it is titled Phthalate and Novel Plasticidar Concentrations in Food Items in U.S. Fast Food Chains, a Preliminary Analysis. So cooking at home, it not only offers better nutritional value, but it also can reduce your exposure to environmental chemicals, particularly phthalates. So what are phthalates? Phthalates are a group of chemicals widely used in plastics or polyvinyl chloride materials. And these chemicals are added for a reason. They're added to make products softer, more flexible, but they can leach out of products into the surrounding environments. So this diagram here in orange kind of depicts where phthalates are used throughout the food processing pathway. And really this diagram just shows that, phthalates are used everywhere, in the plastics, the rubber coating, the adhesives, the sealants. They're used in the packaging component of food processing. They're used in food prep and the gloves. And as I mentioned, they often leach out of the products that they're in. And so all the ways that phthalates are used, they can be leached and get into our bodies and can cause health effects, which is particularly concerning. And so this pathway here depicts all the ways that our food can become contaminated with phthalates as it's processed, packaged, and handled. So while this talk is focused on phthalates, so chemicals and plastics, when I was drafting this paper right in 2019, I attended a webinar talking about PFAS in fast food packaging, which also called this attention to this idea that the fast food we're consuming may be a source of chemicals. So continuing on this line of evidence that fast foods and chemical exposures, my mentor, Dr. Zoda, published a paper in 2016 that was linking fast food consumption to concentration of phthalates detected in your body, because diet is the most predominant way that you're exposed to phthalates. And other papers have also reported similar associations between highly processed packaged food or fast food, which is very highly processed, and higher concentration of chemicals, particularly phthalates, in your body. So the research I'm doing on today builds on this work that, there's a link between fast food consumption and higher concentration of phthalates in your body. So in this paper, we aim to characterize orthophthalates, or as I'll be calling them, phthalates, this class of chemicals found in plastics, and replacement plasticizers in food items and food handling gloves from fast food chains. So in addition to phthalates, we're also testing these replacement plasticizers. Since some phthalates have been banned from certain products, these replacement plasticizers have been used in their place. These replacement plasticizers are structurally different than phthalates, but they're used in the same ways, used in plastics and polyvinyl chloride materials to make things more durable and more flexible. However, there's a concern that we're being exposed to these chemicals, these replacement plasticizers, meaning they're being used in products that we use every day, but we don't really understand what they're doing to our health. So that's concerning. So in AIM 2, we wanted to investigate the bioactivity of replacement plasticizers using EPA ToxCast data. And we did this to advance the toxicity information of these replacement plasticizers, these chemicals that are used in place of phthalates that we don't really know what they do in terms of health. So jumping right into how we did this project. So we used market-based data to select the most popular hamburger, pizza, Tex-Mex, and fast food restaurants. Sampling occurred in 2 phases. We sampled items from multiple locations per restaurant, 64 food items in total from 6 fast food chains, at least 2 locations each, and all the restaurants were located in San Antonio. We also collected 3 pairs of gloves from 3 fast food chains in phase 2 only. We analyzed our fast food items, the gloves, and the food for 11 chemicals. 8 of these phthalates that are well studied and are linked to a variety of health effects such as endocrine disruption, reproductive effects, and child neurodevelopmental concerns. And also 3 of these replacement plasticizers, these other chemicals that are used in plastics that we don't really know much about. And all the chemicals are listed here, the abbreviated names of them. And the lab that we worked with used gas chromatography mass spectrometry to analyze all of the fast food items for the chemicals that we're interested in. So jumping right into the results, here is a table showing the detection frequency of the chemicals. So we have the chemicals on the left side, and across the top are all the food items that we sampled. So we sampled hamburgers, fries, chicken burritos, cheese pizza, chicken nuggets, and just the hamburger patties. And I will say here that when we ordered the items, we ordered the hamburgers as ordered. So it come with all of their standard toppings, because we really wanted to order the food items as any other person would order the items. So we wanted to order the food items and test them as they would be consumed. So overall, we detected orthophthalates and replacement plasticizers in all the sampled foods. So 11 out of 12 chemicals were detected in foods. The only chemical that wasn't detected in foods was DMP. So in terms of detection frequencies, DEHP and DNBP were 2 of the most frequently detected phthalates at 81% for DNBP and DEHP at 70%. DEHT, this replacement plasticizer, was the most frequently detected in fast food items. So here I'm showing the median concentrations of some of the chemicals. I didn't show all of them just for ease, but of course they're all in the paper, which I believe will be linked in the resources for this talk. So generally, or I should say overall, we found that concentrations of chemicals varied by food type. And generally, we saw that foods containing meat contain higher concentrations of chemicals. So your hamburgers and your chicken burritos. Of particular interest was the finding of DEHT, this replacement plasticizer that is used in place of other phthalates that may have been banned or when companies are trying to move away from them. Particularly, we found DHT in the highest concentration of all the other chemicals. Specifically in chicken burritos, it was found at 6,000 micrograms per kilograms. So here we'll move on to the glove analyses. So as a reminder, we collected gloves and foods from the same restaurant. So on the left axis here is the concentration of chemicals in food. On the right, we have the concentration in gloves. And across the top, we have the restaurants that we collected the items from. So we only collected 3 pairs of gloves, so not from every single restaurant. And overall, only the replacement plasticizers, DEHT and DINCH in this case, not the phthalates, were detected in gloves. So compared to DINCH, which is showed here in blue, DEHT was found at the highest concentration in chicken burritos and food handling gloves collected from the same restaurant, in this case, a Tex-Mex restaurant. So said differently, we found that the concentration of DEHT was about 28% to 37% by weight. That's a concentration of the chemical in the glove. And DINCH was about 7% per weight. So that's the concentration of the chemical found in the glove. So moving on to the second objective, we wanted to advance toxicity information for replacement plasticizers. Since these chemicals are less well studied than some of the phthalates like DMBP or diambutylphthalate or DHP, di-2-ethylhexyl phthalate. So we did this by using assay data collected by EPA, and it is available online for anybody to use at the EPA CompTox chemicals dashboard, and that's this picture here is showing. So we'll give you a quick background of how this data is generated and kind of gathered by EPA. So first what you do is you pick your chemicals of interest. In this case, we were using the CompTox dashboard to look for information about DEHT, DEHA, and DINCH. You then introduce these chemicals to cells that allow you to modify or allow you to measure different activities. So for example, maybe you want to see how DEHT affects the estrogen receptor, which is very important in terms of female reproductive development. You then analyze the data from dosing the cells with these chemicals, and you determine, was there activity at this endpoint? So at the estrogen receptor, or are there other receptors or other genes? You maybe then do a dose response curve to see is there a relationship between the dose of the chemical and the activity at a certain endpoint. So in the second objective, we queried ToxCast for nuclear receptor bioactivity information for the replacement plasticizers. We limited our focus to assays that measure a nuclear receptor gene target, since most of the harmful effects associated with endocrine disrupting chemicals, such as the phthalates, the DMBP or the DHP, can be attributed to how a chemical can interfere with signaling pathways that are mediated by these nuclear receptors. So that's how we focused on nuclear receptor data from the CompTox dashboard. So I used the CompTox dashboard and searched for bioactivity information for our replacement plasticizers. And our analyses suggest that, using ToxCast data, that replacement plasticizers interact with one or more of these nuclear receptor signaling pathways, the retinoid X receptor or RXR, the pregnant X receptor or PXR, or the estrogen receptor alpha, ER alpha. So these bioactivities do not necessarily indicate health effects, but they can be really important for understanding how a chemical may lead to certain health effects. So for example, the estrogen receptors have been widely studied for not just female reproductive developmental health concerns, but also for a number of other human health diseases, such as cardiovascular and metabolic diseases. So the fact that DEHA may interact with the estrogen receptor may suggest it may be related to some of these diseases that are related to estrogen receptor activity. So to summarize this work, we found that phthalates and replacement plasticizers were widespread in prepared food at popular fast food restaurants. And this is consistent with literature linking fast food consumption to higher concentrations of phthalate biomarkers in humans. I will say this is some of the first data that's actually quantified these chemicals in fast food. which highlights both an area of need for this research, but it also means we can't directly compare concentrations to other peer-reviewed work. So generally, the results of our study show that foods containing meats had higher concentrations of phthalates and replacement plasticizers. And as I mentioned, there's a lack of studies investigating these chemicals in US fast foods. But other studies have reported higher concentration of phthalates in meat and dairy products, which is what we're seeing here. And additionally, studies have reported finding concentrations of phthalates in foods from grocery stores and school lunches. So again, find concentration of these chemicals in foods that are highly processed. Replacement plasticizers, not phthalates, were detected in gloves collected from the same restaurants as food items. And our concentrations are consistent with a study conducted by the Ecology Center, where they collected numerous amounts of gloves that are used at restaurants and measured them for a variety of chemicals. So we found similar concentrations of DEHT and DINCH in our study as they found in their study. So as I mentioned, the orthophthalates are well studied, and there's strong evidence for health effects, particularly issues with male reproductive effects, children's neurodevelopmental effects. And so they're very well studied. So we know enough to be concerned that we are being exposed to these chemicals from our fast food items. The replacement plasticizers, these DEHT, DEHA, and DINCH, there's just not enough toxicity data out there to really understand what they're doing in terms of human health. So more data is needed to really understand the human health effects of these chemicals. And although our findings are geographically limited, we really collected food from restaurants only in San Antonio, Texas. We think that our results might reflect an industry-wide concern, seeing that fast food items and foods are streamlined to make it easy to prepare, prep, and serve. So although we only measured concentrations of foods from a limited number of restaurants in one location, we think our results reflect an industry-wide concern in terms of fast food being a source of exposure to these chemicals. So moving on, continuing to put our results in context, the idea that fast food can be a source of exposure for these chemicals raises some health equity concerns because certain racial and ethnic groups like non-Hispanic Blacks are more likely to eat fast foods than others because of many factors. This study here that I've highlighted shows that there is a higher density of fast food restaurants in predominantly Black neighborhoods in New York. So if certain groups are eating more fast food than others, and we detected these chemicals in fast foods, that may lead to exposure inequities. And this is concerning because we know that phthalates are linked to numerous health effects. It's also concerning because we know groups like non-Hispanic Blacks are also more exposed to a number of chemicals such as air pollutants, and in some cases chemicals in consumer products. So really this study highlights potential health equity concerns. And thinking about the state of phthalate policy, the best way I can describe it is that the policy around phthalates just doesn't make sense. As I mentioned earlier in the talk, that there are some phthalates are regulated, but that's only in children's toys and childcare articles. So the Consumer Product Safety Commission says no phthalates are allowed in children's toys or childcare articles. However, the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, says phthalates are allowed in food contact materials. So they're not allowed in your toys, but they're allowed to be in things that touch your food that you then consume. So it doesn't really make sense. Currently, the Environmental Protection Agency, EPA, is evaluating all of the research on phthalates under the Toxic Substance Control Act, TSCA. So they're doing this to determine whether or not the phthalates are safe or whether or not they present a risk to our health. And so this is great, that they are reevaluating these health effects to understand, how reevaluating these chemicals, understand the potential health effects. However, under TSCA, only certain ways you're exposed to phthalates are covered. Mainly, food is not something that's covered under TSCA. And those of us in, the research field and advocacy field recognize that there are ways that TSCA can potentially account for the fact that, diet is the main way folks are exposed to phthalates. But at this moment, we're hopeful, and we hope to see that may be accounted for. So this paper came out last October, and it caught a lot of media attention, which was great and also slightly overwhelming, but in the end, great. It was picked up by news outlets. There was a lot of activity around it in terms of Twitter. And the best part of this media attention is that it caught the attention of the right people. So Dr. Zoda and I, we were contacted by 2 congressional staffers who think about consumer products and exposure, and in particular phthalates for some of them. And the staffer reached out to us to talk about, what could be done in terms of policy to address the public health concerns we were raising in our study. And, one meeting led to Representative Raza Krishnamurthy writing a letter on behalf of the Economic and Consumer Policy Subcommittee to FDA, asking them to address the fact that, phthalates are found in food contact materials and that people are exposed to them through eating contaminated food. And while, it is unclear what may come of this letter, it's great to see that our work and the science the good science we put out is potentially affecting change in policy, which we think is wonderful. So that is all that I have for this paper. And at this time, I welcome questions about the research or agents of change. As Sarah mentioned, I was an Agents of Change fellow last year, and applications are now open. So feel free to ask me questions about the research or agents of change, or feel free to contact me at, I have my email listed, I have my Twitter listed, and thank you so much.
All right, thank you. That was great. So if people could have questions, they could type them into the Q&A and I will read them out loud. And so far I see one question. So I'll just start there. What is the most significant origin of these plasticizers into the fast food chain? Do we know is it tubing from milk or packaging or processing or all of them? I mean, I think part of what you did is to try to figure that out.
That is a very, very good question. I will say that, I don't think we necessarily always know what the most significant contributors are. At the top of my head, I don't know the specific contributors. But the fact that you just listed so many different factors, like the tubing, also the packaging, maybe the gloves, maybe the gaskets that go on the equipment or the bottles, all of those things are contributing to these concentrations we're finding in food. So I think it would be great to understand the most significant source and maybe potentially have some type of regulations or policies nipping in the bud. But off the top of my head, I don't know what the most significant contributor is. But that's a good question and a good way to think about it.
Yeah, so actually going on from there, are you aware of any state or local level legislation to address this issue?
I am not. That is something that I am to do next as part of my research with Dr. Zoda, to kind of look at local regulations, not necessarily for foods, but more for consumer products, because phthalates are well known and used in beauty products. So I don't know of any local regulations, but I think local regulations would be a great place to get some things done.
Yeah, I think doesn't the Safer States tracks state level regulations, but so someone could check there too.
Oh, thank you for that.
Okay, how would we go about holding the fast food industry or the specific chain studied accountable?
You know what, I don't know. That is, as a scientist, that is outside of my wheelhouse. I will say in the introduction slide, I highlighted that picture about PFAS found in food packaging materials. And what they did is they published the report online. They listed and named the restaurants. And I saw that some restaurants willingly said they were going to try and phase out PFAS from their food packaging. So that could be a route, but I don't know. for the advocates and for the regulators to figure out the best way to do that.
All right. How about, is this a US specific problem? Do other countries have more far-reaching bans on phthalates?
I will say that generally we see that other countries have stronger chemical regulations. I can't speak on phthalates specifically, but generally other countries seem to have stronger chemical regulations. But these are fast foods, and there's similar menus across chain restaurants. So I think it could be a mixed bag.
A question from Shauna Swan, who does research on phthalates also. She asks, has you or has anyone compared phthalate levels in fast foods versus home cooked foods?
I believe there have been studies linking, the studies that have linked fast food consumption to phthalate metabolites. I believe the comparator group was cooking at home. So I do believe there's research that suggests that cooking at home compared to eating out led to lower consumption of phthalates.
Great. Okay. All right. Is there a clear understanding on the health impacts of the replacement plasticizers found in the food and the gloves?
I would say unclear. I spent a lot of time digging into the literature about the replacement plasticizers while writing the paper. And there just isn't that wealth of knowledge in terms of studies conducted in both animals and humans. And not just these studies we're looking for studies that look at complex endpoints. So metabolic endpoints or neurodevelopmental endpoints. There's just not enough there of these advanced complicated toxicity endpoints to understand what these chemicals are doing. And that's the concerning part. I would say there's enough information about phthalates for us to be concerned. There just isn't that wealth of literature on the replacement plasticizers.
And so related to that is it seemed like the replacements, did they not activate the other receptors like the phthalates tend to do, like the androgen receptor?
I didn't do a complete comparison in using ToxCast data of, say, what phthalates activate versus what the replacement plasticizers activate. And we only focused on nuclear receptor assays. So I can't say off the top of my head whether the androgen receptor wasn't activated or it just wasn't tested using those chemicals, but that's a good question.
Okay, so all right, do we know if there are any safer replacement chemicals that have been studied well and used in the fast food industry? And if you have examples of those.
Well, I will say that the DEHT and DENCH and I believe DEHA, those chemicals have been touted as the safe replacements. And I believe they're labeled as like a good replacement, but also by like an advisory committee. I'm forgetting the name off the top of my head, but they've been labeled as they're, good replacements, but also, we could stand to find a better or healthier one. And that could probably be linked to the fact that we just don't know as much about them. But as of now, the replacement plasticizers that I shown here, those are the ones that are considered the safe replacements.
Interesting. Okay. How do plasticizer levels of meats and dairy from the supermarket compare to that of fast food? Do we know?
Off the top of my head, I don't know how directly they compare as in terms of, is the one from fast food meals higher than the ones from the supermarket meals. I can just generally say that that there are higher concentrations in meats from both of those. And so that's how we were able to kind of compare our results to what was already out there from stores and supermarkets, since there isn't much data about fast food items.
And then someone asked sort of about infant exposure. So I assume these chemicals cross into like the womb and the placenta into a fetus, into breast milk. Do you know? And if that means if they cross into the fetus or baby, and then do we know what that means for infant health? It's kind of a big question.
No, it's a good question. I don't know off the top of my head if they cross over. These chemicals are metabolized very quickly, so they you consume them and they're broken down fairly quickly in the body, unlike like PFAS chemicals, which last in your body for a very long time. So I don't know if they they cross the blood-brain barrier or placenta. That's a good one.
And then someone wonders who funded the study.
So we had a number of funders, nonprofit funders. I can't remember the names off the top of my head, but I'm glad to get back to you about that, or it's on the very, very top of the paper.
It's probably on the paper, right? And actually, you mentioned that, and it is open access, and there is a link on our website, so people can go and read it, read the full paper there, and it's good paper. I would recommend it, and probably the funders are there. Someone asked, are there any studies looking at phthalates in school lunches?
I had seen a study looking at phthalates in lunches, and it fits into what we've seen in terms of these processed foods having higher concentrations of chemicals in them.
All right, I think we are at our time here. We're actually a little over time. So one more question. Are you aware of any thyroid effects of the old or new phthalates?
Thyroid effects. I am not aware of any of the thyroid effects. It's a very specific question. Yeah, I'm not aware, but.
All right. Thank you. A lot of people say thank you for the talk. We have a lot of questions. I'm sorry I didn't get to quite everything, but most everything.
No, that's great.
Anyway, I'm going to hand it over to Hannah now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Edwards, for your time and doing this with us. And thank you, Sarah, for moderating. We're approaching the end of today's webinar. A video recording will be available on CHE's website soon. And tomorrow you'll receive an email containing a link to the video. The next CHE EDC Strategies Partnership webinar will take place on Wednesday, February 23rd, and is titled How Prenatal and Postnatal Exposure to PFAS Affect Child Cardiometabolic Health and Inflammatory Biomarkers within 6 European cohorts. To learn more and to RSVP, please visit our website at healthandenvironment.org. As mentioned earlier, too, Dr. Edwards will be joining us again next month for a CHE partnership webinar in our series on agents of change and environmental justice. Stay tuned for more details. If you are new to CHE and would like to stay updated about upcoming events or more, please sign up to receive the newsletter by selecting the Join Us tab at the top of any page on our website at healthandenvironment.org. Additionally, if you appreciate these CHE partnership webinars bringing the latest environmental research for free, we encourage you to support CHE's ongoing work by making a tax-deductible donation via our secure website. Again, our website is healthandenvironment.org. With that, I would like to thank our speaker, Dr. Edwards, for taking time today to present, and to you, Sarah, for your excellent moderation. Thank you so much for joining us. We're wishing you all much health and wellness. Stay well and take care.